Hello and welcome back to the Claret and Blue podcast. It's our second Q&A episode of the week. We don't normally do two, but we had so many questions when I asked for them over the weekend. Lots about the football against Leicester and lots about transfers. Monday's show was all about Leicester and all the football matters that came up from the back of that. Today is all about transfers. We've got 9 or 10 questions that me and John are going to rattle through today, all about reflections on the window, whether we're light in any positions, all that kind of stuff that felt like it needed its own conversation, its own podcast, basically. Before we get into those questions, John, you had the chance to speak to senior staff at Villa over the weekend at Leicester. Firstly, do you want to just explain what that was like, how that came about, and kind of the piece that's been posted off the back of it?
A few of us had the chance to speak to Damian and Monchi, obviously the two most important people in the football department, shall I say, obviously alongside Unai Emery. The two men that are making the decisions alongside Unai and doing the deals, essentially. So they're the ones who know back to front the PSR issues that Villa have faced, what an incredibly challenging summer it's been. So yeah, it's very, very nice to kind of pick their brains and kind of absolutely understand every detail that went on behind the scenes, basically, over the last few months. So yeah, please do read the piece, because again, I always say it's easier to read what I have to say than listen, I think. So yeah, there should be lots of detail in there, and another piece to come shortly as well from a different subject too.
Okay, I love there's always a little bit of tease there, isn't there? Keep an eye out on social media is the easiest way to find the stories that John is referring to on Twitter/X or Threads. Right, questions then. As I said, there's about 10 or so. Some of them are interlinked together, so I might do them in kind of one go. Paul, first of all, from Threads, says, do you think SCR considerations were a bigger factor than PSR during the transfer window and therefore meant Villa don't make any further signings? Do you want to just explain very, very, very quickly what SCR is?
Yeah, that's squad cost ratio. It's crazy how there's so many like acronyms to things and like details. You need to like have a very, very, don't get me wrong, very, very basic understanding of all these different kind of accounting terms and bits and bobs. That's squad cost ratio. Basically, that's UEFA's version of their financial rules, essentially, which are different to the Premier League's, which is the first issue that Villa faced this summer. And yeah, I think firstly the PSR stuff, I think that's changing. I think next year, or this year, sorry, it's obviously remaining. But then I think eventually the Premier League are trying to align themselves to squad cost ratio. I don't know exactly what figures they are. They'll be in the piece. But yeah, that's basically, you can spend a certain percentage of your revenue, essentially, with UEFA's rules, which basically makes it harder for Villa, at least this, or made it harder for Villa this summer, because they're essentially stricter rules than what the Premier League have. Obviously, clubs who aren't in European football this season don't have to comply with those rules. They only have to comply with the Premier League's rules. So you could make the argument that Villa have been at a disadvantage it's facts, they've been at a disadvantage in terms of what they can spend kind of in proportion compared to other clubs who aren't in Europe, depending obviously on what they've done in previous seasons, PSR, etc. So yeah, Villa have had to do, as Damian has previously said, 2 different puzzles with the lights off, essentially. Like a very, very challenging situation, which is why they've had to raise funds through different player sales, but also limit their spending, essentially. So yeah, we all know that it's crucial that Villa increase their revenue, and there's a plan to do it by 400 million, I think, by 2027 under Chris Heck. Chris Heck's job is incredibly important here, because to win games, you need to buy players. To buy players, you need revenue. Those are the steps. But how do you get on to that ladder of winning games? Well, Villa have, in what Damian said, have kind of worked a miracle under Unai Emery, or Unai Emery's worked a miracle at Villa, basically, to put them on that ladder without doing whatever has to happen beforehand. And to be fair, he's right. Like, Villa would be constantly in the loop of finishing 10th to 12th, maybe punching towards Europe and not quite getting there. That would be the cycle that we're in, unless we have a world-class manager, an elite manager, one of the best in Europe. That is genuinely the only way to get there. It's crazy when you think about it, and we're the lucky ones who have him. And we have the owners who have put this project in place to attract a manager like Emery, so they deserve it, if that makes sense. We are completely in debt to what's happened there, because I don't doubt what Damian's saying for a second, that we know that we wouldn't be able to attract those players and spend the money that you need to stay there unless you have an elite manager like we have in Emery. So yeah, those 3 things winning games, buys players, but to do that you need revenue. It doesn't work. Basically, it's completely broken.
He's got a good turn of phrase, hasn't he? Damian Vidagany. But doing
He does,
two
yeah.
puzzles with the lights off. It's such a nice way of phrasing it.
No, it's true. Like, it's such a challenging situation. This is why Villa are so incredibly ambitious and they want to be competing at the very top. Emery's literally said a few months ago that his dream is to win the league. Like, he wants to win the Champions League. He's not here to waste time, but they can't sign a right back for 20-something million because they have to shift the player first and they have to comply with two different rules that aren't aligned. It really doesn't favour any club who has ambition and who is acting on that ambition, crucially.
Matt, also on Thread, says, I get that we've been constrained, but couldn't we have found a loan or a cheaper defensive cover signing? We just look so light there. I'm very happy otherwise. This was a kind of a bugbear of a lot of fans, particularly on deadline day, of surely we're not at such a limit that we can't even afford a loan signing, like Chalobah to Chelsea, from Chelsea to Palace. Was like, is that not one that Villa could have gone for?
Well, that's it. I'm sure Villa would have looked into it and Dallas had an interest in him, but the deal never happened. And Chalobah, I'm sure, would have wanted to come to Villa to play Champions League football. I think that probably tells you everything you need to know about the financial state of not the club, but in terms of what we can do, our limitations. I think that's probably gives the most proof out of it all. Wages are also important as well to PSR. That mustn't be kind of forgotten. I don't know how much Chalobah was on, probably not too much to be fair. But yeah, Villa stressed that then they had to sell a player. Carlos was the one that they tried to move on. As we've said in the Q&A previously, though, obviously Villa can't facilitate that. It needs to be a move that suits him as well, and there needs to be interest in him for the right money. Obviously, that didn't happen. He got an injury too.
No, I think there's a very short, easy answer to the third question from Hina on Twitter. She says, why are Villa finding it difficult to find permanent moves for some of the forgotten squad, i.e. Coutinho and Dendoncker, especially when we had to try and manoeuvre a one-in, one-out transfer strategy? Is the answer, John, wages?
Yeah, it is. It's wages. It's ages of players as well. It's we are trying to solve issues or try to solve issues that have come about after obviously previous regimes, should we say. It's caused problems for Villa now. So I think everyone knows why we're targeting a certain demographic of player, shall I say, or a certain profile of player, because as Damian said, it's like a boomerang basically. If you're buying players who are going to cause you issues in the future, which you players on big contracts but no resale value, especially in the world of PSR, there's really there are a few reasons why you'd do that. I mean, you can make an exception for a player like, I don't know, a Ross Barkley, because that's someone who Unai Emery wanted to sign, like he wanted to sign Morgan Rogers. So the club acted on that, and he, Villa are aware they're not going to sell him afterwards for a sizable fee or make a big profit or whatever. But that's because they've already signed players under Emery and under the new regime who have bought assets that are doing that. And this isn't, I think we all know where I'm going. When Watkins was signed and his value was rocketed, so has Constance, so has other players that Dean Smith bought. But it's obviously the other group of players that we've signed that obviously we can't shift now, which, that is a problem. And the reason why is, wages.
Okay, fourth question from Dan on Twitter. Was it good business to sign 3 players this window who will not feature at all this season? Ilian Jr., Barrenechea and Lewis Dobbin. So obviously it's very difficult to say whether it's good business as of now. If those 3 players go on to make Villa money in the future, if Barrenechea really, really impresses at Valencia and someone wants to buy him for 20, it is then good business.
Yeah, firstly, just on Barrenechea, Villa, they see a future for him at the club. It's, again, we're kind of going back to what I just said then of the players Villa could sign, there's a group of players who they are going to be offered from Juventus, essentially. Of the players that they were offered, because of what I've just said, Villa need to make sure that they're recruiting players who have either resale value or the ability to play for Villa in the future. If they're signing players who are either on huge wages now and won't contribute particularly in the coming years, what is the point in signing them? Because of the reasons outlined regarding PSR. So, for example, Weston McKennie would come into the Villa team with an already stacked midfield, and he is at an age where he needs to be playing like here and now, and is probably nearly at the peak of his career. Barrenechea is different. Obviously, he's 23, but he's only had one senior season in football, so you'd expect him to be playing until he's probably, 34, something like that. I don't know. But the point is that he can grow, and Villa expect him to grow under Emery in the coming years. Valencia move for him is fantastic, by the way, and they had lots of offers, 7 offers, I believe. And the reason why they've sign players that aren't going to play. Like Rodgers, I think I mentioned this on the deadline day episode that we did. Villa didn't expect him to be playing as much as what he did, and to kind of show the rate of progression that he has as well. So those players, every player progresses differently, but the key thing is they have room to progress. That is the key thing. If Villa signed players who were 28 and that were on big wages, again, the Damian boomerang as such, in 2 years, you're left with players who you can't sell, and you're creating problems in the future. Villa aren't creating any problems in the future after signing Brenner for like 6.8 million and Illing Jr. for obviously a bit more than that, but overall the deal was less than, I think it was about 18.75 million pounds, sorry, for those two players. But they can make more money out of those two, or they can play for the first team. Dobbin is I personally think slightly different, because that's a deal Villa had to do with Everton to basically, be clever.
We scratch their back, they scratch ours.
Yeah, but Dobbin is Everton's most exciting youngster that is of affordable value, right? So if he has a good season in the Championship, or has a good season in the Championship even next year, who knows, maybe he can become a player who is then worth more than his value and then is sold. Or again, if he shows even more, like Rodgers has eventually, then maybe you play in the first team. But those deals are there because they can improve in value and potentially the squad. If you're signing older players, it's not going to happen.
2 questions here that I'm going to put together from Rob and James, both on Twitter. Rob says, I agree with what you and John have both said about our transfers, but do you think Juventus mugged us for 2 players who will not contribute this year? Chiesa and Howson have since left Juventus to the Premier League for similar money. Should we have pushed for them? So Chiesa, Liverpool, and Howson went to Bournemouth, I think. Illing Jr. was also mentioned by James, who says, as Illing Jr. always seemed to be part of the Luiz deal, as a left-sided player, I have a feeling there may have been a willingness to sell Jacob Ramsey if the right price was offered by suitors for FFP reasons, but Diaby's exit then secured JJ's future. It's difficult to see where Illing Jr. fits down the left with JJ, Rodgers, Yuri, McGinn, Maatsen and Dean all able to operate down that flank. Or was Illing Jr. always just a pawn in the FFP game? Get him in, loan him out, and then hopefully sell for profit.
Right, so I'll answer the first question to start with, Chiesa and the centre-back that you mentioned. Firstly, Chiesa, his wage would have blown Villa's structure out the water. So yes, he's gone to Liverpool for a pretty minimal fee considering his quality or what he's shown before his ACL injury. I understand that, and Villa have obviously had an interest in him before, and obviously they would have liked to have brought Chiesa in, but simply unattainable because of the contract. And again, the Damian boomerang applies here, because if you're putting on a player on such a huge contract, that creates a problem down the line. And what happens then? We all know what. As soon as you break your wage structure, the next contract you give to one of your top players, is just doubled again. So it's problems down to continue. And this is something that, like Tottenham, for example, were criticised for when they never went past a certain amount on their wage. But it makes sense, because if you put Chiesa on, I don't know, let's say 280, 300 grand a week, every other player in the Villa team who is important and has got Villa to the Champions League will then just ask for 70 grand more a week or whatever it may be. It's completely unattainable. So I understand the kind of frustration that we haven't improved the squad through those players. But Villa, if you're going to be presented with a short list of players, you're going to pick the players who can improve with loans or by playing in your team. And I don't think Villa would look at it in kind of position specifically, because again, Illing Jr. is 20, which is the same age as Duran. Players grow at different rates. Illing Jr. will play in Champions League next season. He can play against Villa unless there's a clause that we agreed with them that he can't. But then obviously that was made before the draw happened. So I don't know if we did, basically. We'll find out closer to when we play them. When you're working on PSR deals, you have to think about the money, because unfortunately that is PSR, that is SCR. It's all about money. Suarez has said in an interview with the Financial Times, right now it doesn't feel like kind of owning a football club. It's more like you're trading assets, essentially, and that just shouldn't be the case. But it is the case, and because it is, Villa have to assess that first before anything else. These are players who still have high ceilings. They've got plenty of potential, so I'm not worried that they've had a bad deal or whatever. The Luiz thing was... Have we got questions about Luiz coming up, Dan?
No.
The Luiz deal was extremely complicated because Villa were essentially hours away from getting a 10 to 12 point deduction, essentially, because it went down to the wire. Villa were dealing with free agents, free players, 2 clubs. an extremely complicated deal to do. Damian and Monchi are having, sleepless nights, because while Villa have got to the Champions League and there's a big party, they're there thinking, well, we know we have to raise a certain amount, else we get what Everton had and worse. Just on PSR, if you are over the limit by £1 to £5 million, then you get a 6-point deduction. And then after that, every block of 5 million counts for 1 point. So Villa were in the realms of 10 to 12 points. That's what they would have expected if they didn't raise any money, basically. So they had to do deals. Juve had no PSR issues or their financial controls. They were okay with it in Italy. So Villa were basically asking for a huge favour off Juve to say, okay, well, Luiz, we know is worth this. But for you, here's £40 million, because that's what we need. Kind of adding on to the other deals that they did, Villa had no kind of power really, or very little power, because they had to get the deal done, else it's points deduction. And I think it went down to the final day in the end when they announced it, because obviously Luiz was playing in America for Brazil. So yeah, it was an incredibly difficult deal to get over the line. And we said before as well, Villa had to find a buyer for Luiz, and no one's going to help you out in the Premier League. No one's going to try and help you out even in the Champions League. And it's a broken system, because those big clubs no doubt would complain in the Premier League about what Villa and Chelsea and other clubs were trying to do strategically. But then those are the ones who would be trying to get Jacob Ramsey for a minimal fee, or other players for a minimal fee. So the whole thing's completely broken. And by the way, if Villa sold Ramsey, they'd probably fix all of their issues. But Unai said, no, we want to keep him, and this is a player that we need to kind of build around in the future, etc. So there's 4 things that Villa had as objectives basically for the summer window. The first being to find a solution for PSR, which is obviously the most important, to avoid a big points deduction. Have a younger squad. Everything I just said there, kind of about the boomerang situation, like you need to increase the value of players and not make problems for yourself. And Villa obviously finished the game against West Ham with a very young team and managed to go over the line and win on the opening weekend. Have a deeper squad as well. That was the third most important thing. And then fourth, which kind of ties it all together, it needs to be aligned with what Unai wants, essentially. And this is the kind of key thing to the Jacob Ramsey. He said, no, don't sell him. Ross Barkley, buy Rodgers. So Villa are always going to listen to Unai, but there are certain things that they have to do first, which is to raise money. Damian gave a good line saying that we have to make sure that all this food that we're cooking is liked by Unai, which is it makes sense, because if Villa do all of this and sell the players that Unai doesn't want them to sell to raise money, because the good thing is Villa do have assets. That's the key thing. Everton, for example, don't. Luckily enough, they could kind of select what they wanted to do. It doesn't make the job any harder or any less frustrating. But whatever it is that they do, it's Unai that has a large say in what they're doing, because essentially he is the guy that has put Villa in European football in the Champions League. And as I said earlier, he's the one who's ending the cycle of Villa just finishing 10th or 12th or whatever. Even despite all their ambition, you need to get on the ladder somehow. And luckily we have him.
Emmy on Threads says, or asks, how much does a player's character come under scrutiny when deciding to pursue a signing? Even if a player's profile skill-wise may fit a team, if that player has a history as being difficult to manage or disruptive, is that enough to end a club's interest or limit the player's value?
Yeah, definitely. And the group that Villa have, they have lots of leaders now. They have players with experience as well, which is crucial. Yeah, definitely plays a big part. Monchi obviously has a huge database of players and whittles it down to like 10 to 20 players in the end. So where he starts with is a huge number. And obviously profile of players is important on the pitch, but also the profile in terms of the character as well. Of course, that's really important. We spoke heavily on the John Duran situation in the last podcast, I believe. And there'll hopefully be a piece about him coming up soon as well from our conversation with Monchi and Damian. But yeah, the John Duran situation kind of answers that question too, of like, well, yeah, it's important, but also I think it just comes with experience in the dressing room, and it comes with the right players in the first place. And I think that's what Villa have now. If they were to bring in a bad egg as such, depending on what the kind of situation they're in, but if you kind of look at the John Duran situation, I'm not saying he was a bad egg, but obviously harder to manage, shall I say, than what he is now. They've seen signs that he's progressing as a person, I suppose, as well as a footballer. So yeah, having that kind of and this is also key that I need to mention, that Monchi and Vidagany, the key thing for them was coming out the summer window with all of those 4 factors that I mentioned, but also retaining the values in the squad and the mentality that Villa have built. And that's why Emi Martinez was so crucial for them to tie down on a new deal till 2029. He and other players are unsellable because they are what makes the team. And when new players can come in, they can adapt quickly. And it's no surprise to see Onana come in and is like a fan favourite already. And it's like he's been playing it for 5 years. So that is no surprise because of what Unai's built already in the dressing room.
Yeah, and Arno is almost like the perfect example the other way, isn't he, of a good footballer and will offer something to the team on the pitch. But all his media interviews so far have been really good. He's well spoken, very intelligent, but kind of like the post-match celebrations, jumping around on the pitch, like he's clearly integrated himself into the group and having that kind of infectious, bubbly personality, jumping around singing songs with the fans. That breeds out to the rest of the dressing room that, well, if he's like that, we all need to be like that and create that kind of nice atmosphere. One final one on kind of like, I want to say like the negative side of transfers, because there's a lot of questions here that are like scrutinising what Villa have done. From James, who says, in hindsight, will I regret buying Vidagany and Barkley when those transfer fees combined could probably have secured Geertruida and strengthened the first 11 rather than just adding squad players?
I understand it, but Villa had to improve in depth elsewhere as well. If they bought Geertruida and didn't have another midfielder and a winger, all of a sudden we'd be going into the territory where we have no winger on the right side. We have to play McGinn there in midfield. Then Barkley, when he came on against Leicester, I thought was excellent. We didn't have that. If Onana had stayed on after picking up an injury, Tielemans' thing's been very good, but when he's not in the team, you need someone to replace that. I think wherever you look in the team, you could argue, oh, could we have done this instead of that? But I mean, we know that we're light at right back, or that space of right back to centre back. We know that, but I don't think we should be looking elsewhere in the team and suggesting that we shouldn't have done business, if that makes sense, because we'd be light there then. So I think you kind of, I don't know how to say, but maybe looking at issues elsewhere when those aren't issues. The reason why we bought in Barkley was because Unai wanted him. He wanted to sign the player, and we bought back Vidagany because we knew that it was a big error. And this is another key thing, that the Vidagany sale was Damian's or Monchi's kind of key point about why the system is broken, because we had to sell him for PSR reasons last summer, and we had no space for him in the squad, granted, but then he plays well. We regretted it. We couldn't sell Traore because he had big wages, and then he was close to going to Palace for a bigger fee than what we paid for him, and that just shouldn't be the case. What if he went to Palace and was playing really well, and we had to sell him just a year ago for a small fee because of PSR? It's broken, and that's another point why. So Villa really wanted to get Vidagany back because they believe in the player and they think that will be the heir to Leon Bailey, essentially. So I'm not going to criticise the business that they've done elsewhere and suggest that they should have brought a right back instead. I understand it because, you know, maybe we have got lots of midfielders, but there's reasons why they went after those players as well.
And deals are done in certain order anyway. Just because we signed Barkley near the start doesn't mean that we were never in for a right back and we prioritised that position. It's Villa's lack of being able to sell players that meant they didn't get that right back, centre back profile in, not signing those others. I thought Carlos probably was going to go.
Yeah, and Villa's last arrival, if I'm not wrong, would have been Onana, right? If you said at that point and when Onana joined, that's your last signing and you're not going to sign anyone else, I think everyone would be shocked, including Villa. They probably expected to sell Carlos and that the Fulham deal might have gone through and that he wouldn't have picked up an injury maybe to get a move elsewhere again. So, yeah, he had interest from Wolves, West Ham, Saudi clubs. There was a lot of interest in him, but the deal never materialised, and that's a shame. They probably expected it to. And that's the frustration again of, you know, that kind of feels like it's out of Villa's hands, basically.
Different couple of questions to end then. We've kind of spoken about the transfer business that Villa have actually completed this summer. Leighton on Twitter says, what is the situation with Courtney Horse? It's obvious he'll never play for us again, so why is he still here? The proverbial dead wood, if ever we've had one. Courtney Horse has not played for 2 years or something. It's a very strange, almost unique situation to have somebody who's still in and around the squad, like part of the club, but has not played for such a long time and will have progressed massively since he last played for us, that even if he was suddenly fit again next week, I don't think he's good enough to get near the team anyway.
I don't know what the situation is with House, so I'm not going to guess, but obviously he signed a contract not long ago, obviously years ago now, but that was a surprise in the first place. And yeah, obviously he's had injuries. Last played professional game, I think, for Watford against Sunderland in 2020, I can't quite remember now. No, not a player that obviously has a future at Villa, and I don't know why there hasn't been a termination yet, but obviously both parties need to agree. I'm not going to kind of go into the situation because I don't know it. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I could ask Emery, but I think we'd all know the answer of, he's either injured or he's not part of the first team. So it feels like a bit of a waste of questions. So
Final one then for this Q&A, totally unrelated to this summer's business, but a transfer question nonetheless, from Dan on Twitter, who says, who do you think has been the most important transfer Villa have made since 2021? I think it's down to two, I think.
Damn it. I should have done my research on this. Go on, you go.
Well, I'm thinking of that window, so I'm maybe being a little bit the opposite of recency bias. Watkins and Martinez were both signed in that summer.
Summer of 2020, those guys.
Yeah, I'm a year out with my maths of where COVID restarted and stuff. Yeah, so they were the summer of 2020. Damn it, I thought that was 21.
Well, I think Pau Torres has been transformational for us, but I will just double check. Obviously, we've signed Kamara in that time.
Rodgers has been good for us and will be excellent for us, I think, going forward. And if he was to leave, would be worth a lot of money.
For me, it's Pau Torres.
Bailey, possibly. Would you say he was an important signing there?
Bailey's definitely in the conversation, I think, yeah, for sure. He's exceptional last season, and I don't think that's something we would have been saying this time, 15 months ago or whatever. But I would say Torres, for sure.
I can't believe I got my dates wrong. I thought Martinez and Watkins was going to be the obvious answer, and I would pick Martinez and you'd pick Watkins and we'd just move on, and that would be the end.
That's right, 2021.
Yeah. Damn it, Dan, you've done me over there. Right, we'll call it a day there, John. That's all the questions that we had that were transfer related. That's kind of our wrap up of of deadline day, the transfer window, how we assess Villa's business, PSR, SCR, all these different abbreviations covered. We can stop talking about transfers now. Hopefully our podcasts are helping you through the international break with your Villa fix. We did our football related Q&A on Monday where we spoke up a lot about what happened after Leicester effectively. Today, all about transfers. We'll have a football manager video coming out at some point later this week as well. And the Villa Social is filming its first episode this week as well. That'll probably be out over the weekend. John, thank you for joining me as always. Thanks for your insight. The piece that you referenced about this with Damian and Monchi is in the description down below. So if you want to go and read all the quotes in full, we'd urge you to go and do so. Thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Claret and Blue podcast, and we'll see you at the weekend. Bye-bye.